Good afternoon. It is a somber day in Washington State, not just because of the clouds of smoke that we are suffering under. Yesterday, our state inauspiciously passed the 2,000 deaths mark of folks we've lost because of COVID-19. We mourn every single one of those lives. Every single one of those lives are not just a number, they're a family that has suffered because of this pandemic. And those families are in our hearts and will be in the months to come. This has been a year of tragedy for so many people in our state. And to them, I'd like to say that 7 million Washingtonians would like to embrace you and the trouble that you're having. And you are not alone. We are in this together, and I believe that's the fundamental precept that we have to keep in mind in the state of Washington. We've also now seen more than 80,000 COVID confirmed cases in our state. It's another significant and sobering number regarding the severity of this pandemic. And we know just how hard these times are for everyone, even if you haven't had COVID, because this disease has affected us in so many ways in the way we live our daily lives. But I have to tell you, I am heartened to seeing Washingtonians all over the state in so many ways banding together to fight this terrible disease. Washingtonians are masking up across the state. Washingtonians are limiting contact for people outside of their household. Washingtonians are practicing social distancing in so many parts of their lives. And for this, I'm very, very appreciative because it means fewer families will suffer the loss of these 2,000 families in the future. I'm joined today with Secretary of Health John Wiesman, who will be available for questions about this and other issues a little bit later. Now, our air quality, I know, is oppressive, and it remains unhealthy at best and hazardous at worst, according to our state health experts. Depends what region you're in, but virtually across the state we have concerns. The air outside right now is at historically polluted levels, according to our Department of Ecology. Preliminary data from our state's air quality monitors show that last week has produced more days of hazardous air quality than in any period since monitoring began in the early 2000s. You can find the latest information on air quality at www.wasmoke.blogspot.com. Now, our fires, just a comment, people know how severe they have been in some degree, but I do want to go through some of the specifics. The fires have burned more than 620,000 acres of our beautiful state, and more than 807,000 acres during this year, of all fires combined. More than 400 structures have burned. About half of those have been people's homes. And as I've talked about, when people lose their homes, it is much more than an economic loss. It is a blow to their security and a destruction of many of their memories. And the trauma that are with these families is something that we should not diminish, and we should look for ways to help these families. On top of these losses, we're told that in central Washington, there are estimated 200 miles of power transmission lines down, with several hundred poles burned. And as I was driving by the Malden fire and the fires in Okanagan County, Douglas County, and Bridgeport, you'd see these top 8 feet of a pole hanging from wires in many, many places along the highways of these regions. And we want to thank the people who are working so hard on this. I met some of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers who are working really hard in Bridgeport the other day. Our thanks go out to them. They're working in tough conditions. Active wildfires have also closed a number of roads in our state, including areas along Highway 12 near White Pass today. And we have reports of fires threatening dams and other utilities. So it's a good thing to check on status of roads if you're going to be traveling. And please be careful and minimize any travel in areas where we might have emergency operations or recovery operations going on. Our emergency personnel need those roads. Now, having said that, we are confident we will get these fires contained. And we've been able to free up some resources to send to some of the biggest fires in other states. We're confident right now that we have enough personnel and equipment to protect our communities. And we know our neighbors in Oregon are experiencing tougher, to some degree, situation that is ongoing. So just as we have helped other states in our pandemic, we are sharing some of our resources with Oregon. It's not a lot, but it is a gesture that, again, understand we are all in this together. I'm pleased today to be joined by Dr. Crystal Raymond, who's a climate adaptation specialist and a forest ecologist with the Climate Impacts Group at the University of Washington. And in just a minute, I'd like her to speak and address some of the science involving these climate-exacerbated fires. So here's what we know, and there's some things we know. They're not subject to dispute. They're things that we know. The science is very clear, and our common experience is very clear, seeing the increase in fires that have been so horrendous the last several years. And that is that our fire seasons are becoming more intense. This is clear. And it was disappointing because the president had a chance to learn about that yesterday in California. But instead, he just gave deception and smirked in the faces of those who've had terrible losses and those who've been working so hard to reduce these risks of fires. You know, as a person who has talked to Washingtonians and watched them cry at the loss of their homes in the last few days, this is maddening to me, because it seems to me it ought to be a job that we all ought to protect Washingtonians from fire, not diminish this clear risk of climate change induced and increased fire. And I've seen too much suffering to think that we should ignore this clear and present danger to the health of Washingtonians. I wrote an open letter to the president yesterday with the science behind this. And we know this, it's not just the science, it's observations. You know, when I talked to some of the incident commanders, they knew what caused this. Extreme aridity, extreme dryness of grass and sagebrush together with wind. And we know that that lack of humidity is going to increase, and already has, because of changes in the climate. When you talk to firefighters, it's pretty impressive because they tell you that the rules of fighting fires have changed because the climate is changing. Whether it's Malden or Bonnie Lake, firefighters themselves with decades of experience are telling me that they've never seen fires like this before because of this extreme aridity combined with wind. Now, this is despite our efforts and despite our investments in land management, which we are doing in the state of Washington. It appears that the president just really doesn't understand that. And honestly, it is outrageous to me to have a president to criticize states when the president himself called for cutting budgets that could be used to take care of the national forests. And of course, most of the forest land in the West is in their national forests, over 45% in the state. We got 12% state forests. In California, I think it's over 50% national, only like 3% state forests. But the president's budget proposal for 2020 would have cut $950 million from the U.S. Forest Service, including a 16% cut to state wildlife action plans. 2 years before that, this president who comes and criticizes us on the West Coast proposed cutting $300 million from the Forest Service wildlife initiatives. So we're not going to have someone who doesn't know which end of an axe to hold be criticizing us when he himself has tried to reduce some of these actions in the West Coast. Now, we do know that forest management may be an important part of this, but it's only one of the many cogs in what has to be a coordinated strategy where the federal government needs to be a better partner. What we're experiencing right now stresses the urgent need for climate integrated plans to address natural disasters that are intensified by human-caused climate change. And we know the best way to reduce the damages caused by climate change is to stop climate change, efforts that Washington State is leading on. And we are proud of our state's effort and proud to have some of the best laws in the United States to give us clean electricity that does not pollute and more efficient buildings. And we have more work to do in this regard. So I've asked Crystal to join us today to talk about what is driving the intensity of these wildfires and just some of the crucial steps needed to address the problem for our own sake and for our children and grandchildren's. So with that, Crystal, if you can introduce yourself a bit and turn it over for your comments.
Great, thank you for the opportunity to talk today. And I'm Crystal Raymond. I'm a climate adaptation specialist with the Climate Impacts Group at the University of Washington. I'm also a fire ecologist. I've been studying fire and the connection to climate change for over 10 years now. And as the governor said, the connection between climate change and increasing wildfire potential across the West has been clearly established by science for over a decade. The situation that we're in now is unfortunate, but it does not come as a surprise to fire scientists who have been studying this issue for several years across the region. Higher temperatures and drier summers are drying vegetation and fuels across the western US throughout our fire season, so that when we do have ignitions or the right wind conditions, which we've experienced over the last couple of days, wildfires are more likely to spread. The stage has been set. These wildfires are likely to be larger fires as we have been experiencing. And as climate change continues, we will see higher and higher temperatures. We will see a greater potential for wildfire across the region. As bad as it is now, as high as the risks are now, they will continue to worsen as long as climate change continues to worsen. We can expect to see more extreme fire danger days, longer fire seasons, more large wildfires, and an overall greater acreage burned across our forest and grassland ecosystems in the state. If we don't take action now to slow climate change, the wildfire potential will only get worse. I think many people often think of the wildfire issue as something that affects Western Washington or affects Eastern Washington, but what we've seen now is this affects Western Washington and Western Oregon as well. Many people may be surprised to know that, in fact, we have had very large and fast-moving wildfires in the past. In the late 1800s, the early 1900s, we've had some similar large wildfires in this region. The difference now is that climate change is making this problem worse, and that we have many more communities, many more people living in the path of these fires. And so when we do get them now, the consequences are much more severe. And as a result of that, there's been growing concern among many people that we will see these types of large fires in Western Oregon and Washington. And that's what we're seeing happening now. Washington has been somewhat spared. This year, things could have been worse, and that's because we had less of a drought than Oregon experienced. But with climate change, we expect to see drier conditions and more frequent droughts happening here in Washington as well. And we may not be as lucky in the future. And as the governor mentioned, the worst air quality that some of us have experienced here in Portland and Seattle area. We recognize that wildfires don't need to happen right in our own backyard to cause these extreme unhealthy air quality situations. They can happen throughout the West, and it just takes the right winds to bring that poor air quality to our region. As with wildfire danger, as long as climate change worsens, we can expect these poor air quality events to become more frequent. And science has also shown that climate change is only one piece of the wildfire equation. We know that there are other important factors that contribute to wildfire risk in our region. That includes how we manage our forests and our vegetation. It includes development and the wildland-urban interface. It also includes human-caused ignitions. All of these factors are important. And we also know that the relevance of these different factors varies depending on what region of the state we're in. These play a different role in Eastern Washington and Western Washington. And therefore, the solutions that we look at need to be tailored to the specific area and the role that fire plays in that area. But we know that all these factors, including climate change, are a part of the equation, and that the situation is not getting better until we address climate change directly, as the governor had said. Truly addressing the problem requires us to look at vegetation management, to look at how we develop in the urban interface, and to look at how we're addressing the long-term problem of climate change. And I'm happy to address more of the science behind these causes of the wildfire situation that we're experiencing now.
Well, I want to thank you for that excellent recitation, very quick rundown. By the way, Crystal, if I can, this is a bit of a rhetorical question, but the reading I've done on the science of this indicates that there are multiple scientific assessments that are consistent with what you've just suggested. Is that a fair statement? This is not just sort of one research paper that you did. There are multiple assessments, including by the national assessment of the federal government, that's consistent with what you've shared with us. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct. There's been a number of scientific papers that have addressed this issue, whether they're looking at longer fire seasons, more acreage burned, the number of large fires. No matter what metrics you're looking at, a number of different studies have shown that there is a trend in those and that is expected to get worse with climate change. We've seen this for studies that have looked in different parts of the Western U.S., that have looked at the Western U.S. as a whole. This information exists in the scientific literature, and it has also been summarized in regional climate impacts reports that our group has put out, as well as the National Climate Assessment. So there are multiple different lines of evidence, multiple different sources that together are showing this strong connection between climate and wildfire.
Well, listening to you, it doesn't sound like the president's prediction that things are going to cool down is something we can take to the bank, and I wish that they were so. Crystal, thank you. If you can stay with us for some questions later, potentially, I appreciate it. I had a few more comments, if that's okay. Can you stick around for a few minutes? Crystal?
Yes, I can stick around for questions. That would be great.
Thank you. So just comments before you take a question, another COVID-related issue. I just want to report that I had a productive meeting with the Washington State University and Pullman communities last week to talk about how we can learn from their experience to prevent similar spikes. We had a huge spike in Pullman with maybe 800 cases in Pullman, largely because of returning Washington State University students. And we cannot allow that to happen in other colleges and other cities. It is just too dangerous to have those similar spikes. Pullman had one of the top 5 cities as far as infections a couple weeks ago, and we just have to do a better job than that. So we know other universities will have students coming back, and even if their classrooms are remote, what we're finding is that students tend to like to socialize. We certainly understand that. But that socialization that takes place in apartments and dorms is killing us. And that's what's happened in Pullman. So I will be having further discussions with administration, leaders of colleges, the student body leadership, and police agencies. Tomorrow, actually, we're having a discussion to share how we can all be active to prevent these horrendous events from happening in other college communities. And this is important, obviously, not just for the college students whose health we care about. We know that young people may be less susceptible, but they can have very severe consequences. But these communities, if people come back to Bellingham and Ellensburg and in Olympia and Vancouver and then affect the rest of the community, this is just unacceptable. So I'm looking forward to all of us pitching in to encourage students to act responsibly and socially distance, and not allow the desire to party overcome our desire not to kill people in your family and your community. So I'm looking forward to some pretty aggressive actions in that regard. I also want to thank the Pullman police who have actually issued citations to party operators. And the Pullman City Council is considering a further ordinance to allow citations against party goers under these situations. So I'm looking forward to us all pitching in. I also want to say that there is reason for concern in this regard. We just cannot abandon our gains that we have had. The latest projections from the Institute for Disease Modeling have not been hugely encouraging because they indicate there may have been an uptick in our R0 number, our effective number. You see the graph here, and we've gone perhaps above 1 again. It's possible this coincides with more fall activity starting up, such as return to classes, but it's surely a reminder that this disease demands our continued diligence. We need to keep up our great work. Have some good news on this front. We expect soon to be able to announce some start of efforts to be able to use apps to notify people when they've been in the proximity of someone else who's been positive. It's work we're doing with our partners in the Western States Pact, which will use technology to get secure and timely information to people so that they can look after their own health. And this is something that's been worked out so that there are not privacy violations. Well, we hope to have more to say about that in the next few days about announcements of the next step. So with that, happy to stand for your questions, and I know Crystal and Dr. Wiesman would also like to do so.
First question comes from Joe with the Seattle Times. Joe, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, question for the governor or Secretary Wiesman. Can you walk us through what you know about the increase in, I believe it's the Eastern Washington COVID transmission rate? Is that all attributable to Whitman County, or are you seeing other transmission bad signs elsewhere?
John, we'll take that.
Right. So indeed, the largest uptick really is in Whitman County in the association with the students' return, as the governor said. We are seeing a little bit of uptick in a few counties, but the central counties have been sort of starting to come down. You know, the great success that Yakima's had, Okanagan's rates are coming down as well. Benton's have been coming down. So, you know, the large activity right now seems to be in Whitman, although there are certainly still cases in those central counties and in Spokane. So we're keeping an eye on all of that. And again, I think the message for everyone is this virus hasn't gone away. We still need to pay attention to masking up and keeping our physical distance and keeping everyone safe.
If I may, what we're seeing is that the front lines on this battle against this pandemic are moving, maybe a little away from some of our businesses, but now moving into the living rooms and the kitchens and the dens and the dormitories and the apartments, where we're very concerned that as fall approaches, people come inside, college students come back, get back to their old ways of partying, and these numbers blow up. Look, in Pullman, they exploded. It's something like, John, was I correct? There's like 70% positivity. Am I wrong about that? I think I was right about that.
Yeah, in some days, depending on how much testing was done.
So these are not like modest bumps. These are explosions that can happen, and in smaller communities, not just in, not just in downtown Seattle. And so we've done, I think, some really good work in our state. Business leaders and employees have pitched in to adopt social distancing in businesses. Some businesses have not been able to be open, which is incredibly painful to them. And to go all through that economic dislocation and then have our social activities blow this thing up again, we just can't allow that to happen. And so I'm asking all Washingtonians to be leaders this fall in the battle against COVID in their living rooms, which means we just can't have groups of people without masks, without being social distance, who are not in our household. Somebody was teasing me online the other day. I don't think it was actually teasing. I think it was kind of a hot criticism. But in any event, they saw a picture of me wearing a mask where my grandchildren were at a home, and they thought that was just silly. No, that's saving people's lives, maybe my grandchildren's, maybe mine, maybe my wife's. And so I really hope people take it to heart that what they do in their own homes in the next several months could have a huge impact on survival of people in our state. And that means we lost 2,000 people already. This is not the flu. If you remember when Donald Trump says this is not worse than the flu and it was just going to go away, wrong. This is a deadly disease and it remains so. And we hope people will pitch in.
Joe, would you like to ask a follow-up?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Next question comes from Keith with Como.
Governor, I'm not sure sitting as governor you can answer the question, but on the campaign trail, Lauren Culp wants to debate you and you're not agreeing to one. What's the situation?
No, I'm really happy. It just got announced we are going to have a debate. I think it's October 7th. The Debate Coalition, it's a group of broadcasters and civic organizations. I think your channel may be one of them, and they've announced there is a debate October 7th. I'm really glad to have that. Looking forward to that debate.
Keith, would you like to ask a follow-up?
Yeah, some of the high school football players have gotten together and they're going to be meeting with you or a representative of your office on Thursday. They want to have fall sports returned, particularly football, to come back. What's your thoughts on that? And also for Secretary Wiesman, as far as bringing back football and other fall sports back to the fall.
Well, to date, we have thought the best course is while schools are not open for non-remote learning, it's difficult to justify doing a lot of the sports, particularly those that involve, close contact and the like. And our schools just don't have the same, wherewithal to manage everything like the Seahawks, and the Mariners. They just don't have that ability. So we have thought that right now, given the course of this pandemic, that for the safety of the players and the community, it makes sense to reschedule these seasons, to do them later next year in the spring. And so the WI, and I say we, this is actually not our decision in the state. We have made a recommendation to the schools where the decision is made, and the Washington Interscholastic Athletic Association, they made the decision to reschedule these seasons, and that's where the decision-making is actually made. So, but we do think we want to listen to these athletes. We appreciate them being involved and expressing themselves. And if they've got ideas going forward, we need to know them. Because we do believe we are going to eventually continue to knock down these numbers. And if we do, then we'd like to hear from these athletes what protocols, what habits can we adopt to reduce the risks so we can go back as soon as possible. And I look forward to that discussion.
Secretary Wiesman, would you like to respond?
Nope, Governor said it very well. Thank you.
Next question comes from Jim with the Spokesman Review.
Governor, it's my understanding there's no laws or rules addressing wildfire smoke for farm workers. And so what is the state doing to address the danger of wildfire smoke for farm workers at a time when air quality is so unhealthy?
We're trying to stop climate change so that climate change won't make these fires so intense and we won't have to breathe it. We're breathing climate change right now, and so are farm workers. And I'm certainly doing everything I can, and I think the state's done some great work to reduce the risk of these fires that are really climate fires. These aren't just wildfires. Wildfires are kind of an act of God. There's a natural condition. These are climate fires because they've been intensified by the climate change that makes our grass so dry. And I appreciate Crystal's explanation, but to some degree, it's not really rocket science that when we get hotter temperatures, the grass gets drier and you get more fires. This really shouldn't be subject to a lot of debate, and isn't in the scientific community. So what we're doing specifically for ag workers, we don't have a specific, rule in this regard. We encourage everybody to try to protect their own health, and certainly employers to do what they can. So I can't tell you that I've got some filtration system that can help ag workers. And I also want to show my respect for the people fighting these fires who have to breathe this, 14 hours a day. I frankly don't know how they do it. I was kind of coughing when I went up the Sumner grade fire the other day. I could already take 20 minutes of it. So I will you didn't ask this question though. I am glad that some of our activities, some of our rules to protect ag workers, I think, are working. We've had good success. We've imposed a testing requirement for ag workers at an orchard operation in Brewster, and that's gone very well. I think that a considerable number of our hygiene requirements are working to reduce the risk to these really hard-working folks in our state.
Jim, would you like to ask a follow-up?
On a similar vein, is the state doing anything for the homeless population, which is out in this unhealthy air right now?
Well, to the extent we've helped some local communities have set up sort of a non-congregated sanctuaries, and I think that's a good idea. I appreciate cities and counties doing this in a variety of different places. By the way, I want to mention when you talked about ag workers too, this doesn't prevent the problem, but we have established some funds to help ag workers during the COVID crisis that to some degree is contemporaneous with this smoke. So I hope that will be helpful. It's $3.5 million for ag workers. And I hope that can help some of these folks through these problems.
Next question comes from Essex with Cairo.
Yes, Governor, do you risk placing too much emphasis on climate change when in the short term it is forest management and wildlife management practices that would ease some of the problems in the next few years instead of the next decade?
No, look, we're doing those things in the short term. We're doing management. We've done management, I think, about 60,000 acres on state land. We're doing these things. And I appreciate the hard work that's being done to do that. So we are taking short-term measures in this regard, and I appreciate homeowners are doing short-term measures as well to try to use fire-wise protocols to fire-wise their homes so they're less likely to burn. These can be really successful. It's amazing how often I'll go and see 3 houses burnt and then one that's, not burnt because people have been successful removing brush and tinder and, pine needles from their gutters and the like. So we appreciate that work as well. But no, I don't believe, look, when you have hurricanes battering the South, Miami Beach getting flooded by rising sea levels, hurricanes up and down the East Coast, the Midwest being flooded so badly that you had massive amounts of losses by farmers. I remember visiting a little town called Hamburg, got washed away. It was founded in like 1880 or something, and it lived all those centuries until you get these climate increased flooding that's washed away the Midwest. And in the West, it's all on fire. When those conditions exist, I believe we have a responsibility to speak up. And we're doing that. I'm not the only one doing it, thankfully, and I'm glad we're doing some things about it, about climate change in our state. And we're growing jobs because of this too. I want to mention this. As I was leaving Malden the other day, I saw kind of the alpha and omega of climate change. The alpha was the terrible losses. The woman who just could not stop crying, who told me that her dream was gone because she dreamt of living in a small town in a beautiful place with nice people, and that's Malden. And that dream has just been destroyed for her, and she couldn't stop crying. When I left town, I came around the corner and I saw wind turbines up on the ridge to the southeast where we're spinning clean electricity. And we're creating jobs of people who are maintaining, they got really good jobs maintaining those wind turbines and building those wind turbines, and sheet metal workers and laborers who've built them, and farmers who are getting royalty payments from them. That's a future that we can embrace and create lots of jobs. So I think we're doing the right thing in our state, which is leading the nation away from more climate fires and towards more clean energy jobs. That's a good future for our state, I think.
Essex, would you like to ask a follow-up?
Yes, my follow-up is for Dr. Raymond. The high winds that we've seen driving these fires so unusually, are the high winds linked to climate change?
So the connection between climate change and winds is something we know less about. We're currently pursuing a study on that right now at the climate impacts at the University of Washington to have a better sense of the connection between east wind events and climate change specifically, because we know that's such an important component to getting wildfire on the west side of the Cascades. So currently, we don't know exactly what the connection is there, and there's certainly more research that needs to be done. So it's an important factor and a key piece. We also know that even if we don't get more of these east wind events with climate change or more intense east wind events with climate change, we would still expect to see more wildfire simply because of the drier conditions setting the stage for that. So we do get a couple of these east wind events each year. And it's the combination that really leads to wildfire here. So if you increase the dry conditions, if you increase the potential for wildfire, then the chances of getting one when we have an east wind event will simply go up. And hopefully with this study, we can get more specifically at these particular types of wind events and whether or not we'd expect to see them happening any more frequently or in different seasons or any more intensely with climate change, because that's certainly a key piece we want to know more about.
Crystal just provoked a thought, if I can add something to this question. Having been to these fires, there are certain things where management can make a difference. There are places where you can remove some overly dense timber that can reduce the intensity of forest fires, and we're doing some of that work here in the state of Washington right now. But there are also many places where that's just not an option. The fires in Bridgeport, the Pearl Hill fire, you can look out. I was at Bridgeport and it burned right to the edge of town, burned about 20 homes down, destroyed or interfered with their utilities. So I was over there trying to help to get water for people can drink and have potable water. But when you look up the hill, they're not trees. These are not tree fires by and large, at least in that area. They're grass and sagebrush, And there's really no management you can do over tens of thousands of acres of grass and sagebrush. You just can't get out your lawnmower and mow that grass over tens of thousands of acres. And that's what we're up against. The solution there is to prevent that grass from becoming like gasoline. And the aridity caused by the lack of humidity and the high temperatures drives an evaporation process that dries that grass and sagebrush out, and it becomes explosive. And when I say explosive, I mean that. You talk to firefighters, these things look like they blow up. There's 20, 30 feet of flame above these fires, even though no trees are involved. So we have to realize there are many places in the state where the best is option, just got to stop them from getting that dry and explosive.
Yeah, and the grasses is a great point. That's another important climate change connection, is that in some environments like sagebrush and grasslands, where it's really those fine fuels that are driving the wildfires, we know another climate change link there is that wetter conditions in the wintertime and the spring, something that we expect with climate change, actually increases the amount of fuel that grows in those environments. And then that fuel dries at the summertime and actually becomes more available to burn. So we know that the changes in precipitation in the winter and the early spring, what we expect with climate change, more wetter conditions then can actually contribute to the wildfire problem in those grass and sagebrush type environments. So it's another factor there. And then in terms of the solutions, yes, we know that different solutions, different approaches are going to work in different environments depending on what the key drivers of wildfire are. And in certain places, vegetation management, fuel treatments are going to make a bigger difference. In places where we've actually taken fire out of the system, doing something to reduce the fuels that have built up will make a much bigger difference and have more of an impact in those environments. In other cases, that's not going to be the case.
Next question comes from Alexis with the News Tribune.
It sounds like the UW plans to test 10,000 people returning to campus for COVID-19. And I'm wondering if the state thinks widespread testing like this of people who don't necessarily have symptoms might be practical in other scenarios at some point.
John, you want to talk about that?
Sure. So yes, the University of Washington, I think, just announced yesterday a sort of multi-pronged testing approach that they're taking with their students, offering folks in partnership with the SCAN project to do testing both when they first come back as well as periodic testing. So they're making resources available to do that. We definitely think that testing is one component of this approach, and different universities are trying different approaches. And I think we have a lot to learn to see which approaches seem to work best all across the US. There are different universities that are taking different approaches here. I think those we're going to learn a lot from those as the different universities do that. I also think, as the governor said, that key to this is behavior change as well. We need to have folks who are acting differently this school year than they used to. The parties that folks might have had with large numbers of folks is not something that's safe to do this year. And we need people changing their behavior. And of course, if an outbreak does occur, the more quickly folks can identify that and get additional testing resources in to the area is going to be really key. So I think we need to take a look at this in its entirety. And we're really pleased that the University of Washington is moving in this direction and hope to learn a lot from their approach.
I want to make some comment. This spike happened at Washington State University. It was the first college to come back. And so that's probably the reason that they got hit so hard. This is not some, characteristic of the Cougars that made them susceptible. And I appreciate the leadership that's being shown there. The student body that I met with leaders have some really innovative messages that they're sharing with their all over campus and off campus with their colleagues. One of which is they have a sign that says, "Don't be a COVIDiot." Simple and to the point. Dr. Schultz is helping from an administration standpoint. There's some sanctions that are possible for students. And the police forces, I indicated, are pulling forward. So we hope that some of the things that are going on now in Pullman, including on-site testing, that they think is going to be very successful. We want the Cougars to share those good ideas with Huskies and others.
Alexis, would you like to ask a follow-up?
Yes, please. Governor, do you have any updates on a timeline for a potential federal disaster designation? Is the state still in the process of assessing damage this week for the fires?
We are collating image. I don't have an update for you. We're doing it as fast as humanly possible. We're very hopeful that the administration will be fair to us in the state of Washington. In our last request in the last fires, we were not granted that. Frankly, I was very disappointed by that failure of the administration. I hope that we have a better result this time. So I can't give you a specific timeline.
Next question comes from Drew with King 5.
Good afternoon, Governor. I wanted to talk about schools. Snohomish Health District has a plan to offer guidance for in-person learning potentially in November if the numbers continue to trend down. Are you concerned about that? Pierce County has been looking at that as well. You talked about people heading back inside come this fall with potential increases. Should we just not plan on seeing our students back in school by the end of the year, or do you envision more schools in larger districts coming back, say, October, November?
I envision all of us making really smart, scientifically health and education-oriented decisions. And those decisions are ones we make every day based on the new science that we have. I'm obviously hopeful that we get back in school classes as soon as consistent with good health decisions based on the science. We hope that this reduction in infection will continue. If it does, then at some point, obviously, we're going back into the classroom. But when that is, I can't give you a prognosis. I can also tell you that we have under discussion some more wide-scale testing that perhaps could help particularly some of our younger students get back earlier, but that's a ways off. We have to look at the efficacy of this wide-scale testing and the availability to deploy it. So that's not a decision we can make today. So I know this is, I wish that I could offer you a crystal ball on this. What I can offer you is a daily dedication to the science and decision-making. And we have made recommendations, but these decisions are being made by the local decisions, the local school boards, the local communities. And we have deferred to them largely, and we'll continue to give them scientific information as we have it.
Drew, would you like to ask a follow-up?
I did. The Mariners canceled their games today and tomorrow over the air quality. They played a doubleheader yesterday. Was that smart? Did your office or the health department get involved at all in those decisions?
John, do you want to address the issue of?
Right. So locally, local health departments are often asked to consult with whether it's schools or sports groups or others in terms of advising on any outdoor activities. I don't know what conversations may or may not have had there. I'm not not privy to that information right now. But that is the kind of consultation we encourage folks to do. And there are some guidelines that the health officers across the state have developed around those. I don't recall those guidelines off the top of my head to know how that might have applied in this situation. But that kind of consultation with local health officers is exactly what we would hope folks would do.
Next question comes from Austin with Northwest News Network.
Oh, hi, Governor. Just a follow-up first to the question Jim Camden asked about farm workers. And just to compare this to COVID, where you were instituting orders and restricting activities, has there been any thought or consideration to pulling people who are working in the out of doors inside and saying it's just not safe right now as long as the air quality is so bad, or doing something more to, in the short term, protect them from this work they're doing outdoors where they're breathing the smoke?
I don't believe we have seriously considered such actions.
Trying to get KN95 respirators.
Just been pointed out, my staff says we have had some efforts to see if we can get some respirators out to folks. I don't know the status of that. John, do you have any information about that, status of that effort?
I don't. What the normal process for organization that's looking to have the N95 masks, for example, for their workers would be to go through their local county emergency management and see if they have any. And then if they don't, to put a request into the State Emergency Operations Center. I don't have the information on me to know if those requests have been made or not.
Austin, would you like to ask a follow-up?
Yeah, just in follow-up to Drew's question about school reopenings, it looks like based on the decision tree that DOH put out, that quite a few districts would be in counties that are in the moderate category, where at that point, the recommendation is to expand in-person learning to elementary school students. I'm just wondering about pushing or encouraging elementary schools or districts to start to do if they are in that moderate category. It seems like there's some reluctance or resistance right now generally to do in-person learning, regardless of the numbers.
Right, so I was going to actually add on to what the governor said to the earlier question, and this is exactly what I would have been talking about had I jumped in. So we are seeing some good progress, as the governor said, with our rates coming down. And Austin, as you point out, I looked at the numbers yesterday, I think it was, and 4 counties right now have had no cases in the last 2 weeks. 6 counties have had case rates under the 25 per 100,000 over the 14 days. And 15 counties have that sort of rate in the moderate, as you were talking about, between 25 to 75. And the guidance has been, and again, these are local decisions that need to be made, but the guidance that we put out was once you're below 75, some thought should be given to bringing back younger kids first, perhaps in a hybrid model with again the physical distancing that's needed, the mask, the face covering being worn, the attention to the sanitation of the school. And so there are schools and counties now that are reaching that point where I know they are giving that thought and certainly falls within the guidelines. Again, schools have to think through how ready they are to switch to the curriculum. And our encouragement is if they're considering that, start slow, start with the youngest folks, and sort of see how that goes and monitor progress before one moves further.
We have time for just 2 more questions. Next one comes from Jerry with the Everett Herald.
I think this question may be for Secretary Wiesman. I wondered if you could talk a bit about the impact or interrelationship between the heavy smoke and the spread of COVID. I'm just wondering if it's impacting people's behavior in a way that it's slowing the spread, or if it's masking symptoms and maybe people don't realize they have COVID because they think it's just the smoke.
Great. So, at this point, we don't have any sort of information to suggest one way or another what the impact might be. But as you do point out, the symptoms that can go with smoke can also be similar in terms of the respiratory systems for COVID. Those things about sort of dry cough, sore throat, difficulty breathing. So in this period of time, obviously what we're encouraging people to do is the safest thing for them is to try and stay indoors with their windows closed and try and keep the air as clean as you can in your home. If you have air conditioning, having that on a recycling setting so that you're not bringing in additional air from the outside, but you're getting it sort of cleaned inside is incredibly important. And as you might be, bringing other family or friends over, if they don't have housing, if they're needing to, for whatever reason, escape that, the importance of, again, checking if they have symptoms, wearing their face coverings, even inside, and keeping distance if you're bringing other than your household members inside your place. So again, we kind of got these two things that are competing, and paying attention to the messages we've been saying about what to do if you're inside apply very well here.
Jerry, would you like to ask a follow-up?
Yes, please. I wondered if you could put in context too, the R0 estimates concerned about an uptick. Those stats seem to be before Labor Day, but case counts are coming down, especially in the largest counties. So what are you anticipating from Labor Day? Are you expecting a surge, or do you have evidence or signs that there won't be? What are you expecting, and can you put those two numbers into context?
Well, we're going to have to wait and see what the numbers say, obviously. But what I'm hopeful about is that folks maybe have learned some lessons from sort of Memorial Day and July 4th, and understood or heard our messages around the holiday, and continuing to be vigilant about the protective measures we've been talking about. I think, if we are going to see an uptick from that, we would be expecting to see that probably any time about now. The average incubation period is about 5 days or so, and it can be as long as 14 days. So we're watching those numbers. It will be a bit tricky, I think, for us right now to fully understand what's happening because of the smoke conditions out there. A number of the community-based drive-through test sites have closed the testing because of that sort of dangerous or hazardous air out there. So it's going to take us, I think, a bit of time to see what's happening. Now, the good news here is when we look at other data like hospitalizations, those hospitalizations have come down also over the last 4 weeks. So we'll be looking at other data as well, not just the testing data. We'll look at hospital admission data or emergency room data to see if there's an increase in COVID-like sort of illness admissions. That might be a bit difficult to tease out as well, because some of those in terms of respiratory are also going to be related to the smoke issues. So we're going to do our best to keep our eye on it and understand what might have happened. But again, like all of these, we actually have within our own personal power the ability to prevent ourselves from getting COVID.
We have time for one more question. It comes from Hannah Scott with Cairo Radio. Hannah, are you there?
I'm here, yes. So this question would be for the governor or for Dr. Raymond. I'm wondering, acknowledging, of course, the role that climate change has to play, but can you quantify the importance of forest management related to that and rank where Washington stands as far as investing in that?
Well, I know that as far as ranking, as I've indicated, the national forests have the predominant forests in our state. I think it's about 42% national forests. I think it's 12% state forests. California, it's like 52% national forests and 3% state forests as far as how we rank. I don't have any sort of ranking of state effort, except that we, as I've indicated, we have about a $16 million budget, I believe, that includes some of this management work. As I've indicated, we've done, I believe, about 60,000 acres in the last 3 years, so it's not insignificant. But you do have to realize the vast landscape we're dealing with. You know, and this is one of the things I don't think the president appreciates. He said if we just picked up the leaves, that would be okay. I think he's maybe used to Central Park. Just the areas in one fire that burned in the last several days is 7,500 times larger than Central Park. These are vast landscapes. So the challenge is quite significant, and I'm glad we're acting. I think we're doing within the state of our resources about what we can do. Dr. Raymond, do you want to add anything to that?
I would just emphasize that the role of forest management, it really depends on the different forest types, you know, as we talked about, and there are some places where it makes sense and it's going to have a much bigger role in reducing the potential for wildfires. And then we know there's other places where it's really going to have to be an issue of emergency management, building codes, how we build in the wildland urban interface, and then in both cases addressing climate change. So I think it really depends on the forest type, the vegetation type that we're talking about in terms of how big of a factor it is. And that really varies for different forest types around the state.
I think the concern that some of us have is that the president is using this as an excuse for inaction against something we do know is a problem, which is climate change. Nobody that I know of is arguing that we shouldn't do some of this fuels management program on our forest lands. Nobody's arguing that. That has a place in this. There's no question about it. But by using that as an excuse to ignore this mortal danger of climate change is inexcusable. And it's consistent with what he did on COVID, which is ignore the science, say the science isn't there, downplay the program, and it's exactly what he's done on climate change. He said that climate change is a hoax. It's just going to cool down, and then look for excuses for inaction, just like he did on COVID. And having seen people standing in the ashes of their home, that's not acceptable to me, and it shouldn't be acceptable to any Washingtonian. We deserve better from our federal government and our leaders in that regard. Now, another thing I'll add, perhaps I indicated this too, there's clearly places where some management can help, but there's a whole lot of places where it can't. One of which was Bridgeport. The other was Malden. I asked the incident commanders, is there some management that could have stopped this fire? And they said, of course not. These are grass and brush fires. It's not like there's a huge forest that you can go and thin. There isn't any forest there. There might be some scattered trees. But the grass and brush is just not susceptible to this. So we need more action on climate change and less excuses, and we'll have less fire.
Hannah, would you like to ask a follow-up?
Yes, just really quickly, we talked a lot about the possibility of schools reopening. I'm hearing from a lot of people still wondering about when we might see advancement of phases for counties, like Secretary Wiesman mentioned, that haven't seen cases for a couple of weeks. Can either of you offer anything on that?
Well, what we can say is we're evaluating this every day, and I know people have heard that refrain, but it is true, and I can't give you any dates of changes that are contemplated. They could happen at any time based on the science. I'm pleased that we have made some progress recently. We allowed gyms to open in 5 or 6 counties where they had not been able to be opened in areas that were not in phase 2 or 3. We're pleased to do that. There's some new guidance coming out very shortly regarding weddings, receptions, and a few other activities that we think are justified by our progress. That, I don't know if that's happened today or tomorrow, but we are making some changes as circumstances allow.
Final words, Governor?
I'm sorry? No, I thank you. I know these are very difficult times for people. This smoke is oppressive. It affects us, not just in our breathing, but the way we feel and the way we think. And we go to Washingtonians, we're praying for rain and importantly, wind. And I just hope people that can, as we go through these darker days, realize this is a temporary thing for us. We are going to get through this together. I believe that very strongly, that we will have a vaccine eventually for COVID that will reduce the risk. I believe eventually we are going to have a clean energy economy that reduces the risk of these forest fires. And I just ask people to realize we're all in this together. We're going to get through this together. Thanks a lot. Be well. Wash your hands, mask up. Thank you.